in this lesson, we'll learn what Max's schematic view is and how it can be used. Very shortly, we'll be automating the movement of the engines just so we can get an idle going. Now, ideally what we'd want is a secondary control that has all of those connections that are responsible for causing the engines to idle, all tied to that secondary control. We don't want it on the primary control because by doing so, we will lock down certain axes that we'll want the animator to be able to control on these control objects. Alright, so we want them to be able to animate these control objects freely. And the reason why we want to set up this automated idle is because that can save the animator time. If we can just go ahead and have them kind of float around, they won't have to worry about animating that to speed up their animation workflow. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and create a point helper, and we can use that as our secondary control. Alright, so heading to the create panel, underneath helpers, let's go ahead and create a point helper. I'll just go ahead and create this, and then right click to exit. Okay, so with this in place, I'm going to go ahead and press Shift A and align this, or quick snap this to the right side, our right engine control. Alright, with it selected, we can go ahead and rename this. It's going to be PTCTN for Point Helper Connections _ R _ engine 01. Okay, now we don't have to worry about resetting the X-form on this, but what we do want to do eventually is go ahead and freeze its transforms, which will make setting up our connections for the idle a lot easier. Okay, so before we go ahead and do that, I'm going to go ahead and clone this over to the left side. We can just hold down Shift and then drag that over. And now we can go ahead and rename it from here too. That's going to be PTCNTL engine 01. Okay, let's go ahead and quick snap this to the left control. Okay, so now that these are in place, we can go ahead and take this left one and color code it to match the left side's color scheme. So we can use let's say a light blue, a lighter blue than the blue that we've chosen for our control object for clarity. The other one is already green. If you wanted to, you can go ahead and kind of change the shade of green that's chosen. Let's say maybe using one that's more has a little bit more of yellow in it, and just for clarity. Okay, so we saw how we can go ahead and use this link tool to link objects, but let's go ahead and work with the schematic view now. So we find that underneath the graph editor menu. Here it is, new schematic view. I'll go ahead and open that up. Alright, and we won't be covering everything in the schematic view, okay, because there's a lot here, but I'll show you the main things you need to be concerned with. Alright, so first off, you can see that we have all of these nodes, and these are basically all of the objects in our scene. So we can see firsthand that the schematic is a node-based system that shows us the relationship between objects. Alright, now there's a clutter going on in the schematic. Let's say if we were working with multiple pod racer rigs. Well, you could imagine how cluttered our schematic would be. So let's say if we just wanted to focus on the nodes of one of those pod racers while collapsing the other pod racer group. Well, we can go ahead and select the pod racer. Notice it's right there at the center. Okay, you'll always find it at the center and at the top above the other nodes, showing us which is the parent in the hierarchy and which are the children. So with that object selected, the pod racer group, notice how it also selects it in the scene itself. We can now go ahead and right click and choose collapse selected. And now if we were to go ahead and press the Z key, well, let me go ahead and undo that. I'll press the Z key to find the pod racer. Notice what we see here is that everything has been collapsed underneath this node, and all we have left are our point helpers that have not been tied to this pod racer node just yet. Okay, now if we want to go ahead and expand it, we can go ahead and right click and choose expand selected. Now everything's back to the way it was. I'd also like to mention that when you create objects that are automatically going to be added to the right side of your schematic. So you want to go ahead and pan all the way over to the right, and here you find those helpers that were made. Now watch this. We can actually change this view from horizontal to vertical. So I'll go ahead and change the layout here under options. Right now it's at reference mode or horizontal mode. If we go ahead and choose hierarchy mode, now everything is set up vertically. Okay, and if we want to go ahead and find those helpers, they're actually going to be at the top of the list. Okay, but still to the right side. Okay, so with that said, I'm actually going to go ahead and switch this back to the reference mode. Again, under options, I like to work with reference mode. Okay, also, right now we want to basically set up a relationship between our engine groups and their point helpers. Okay, and we also want to go ahead and then set up a relationship between the helpers and the actual control object for the engines. So to do that, it would be easier for us to go ahead and collapse the groups of the engine. So I'll go ahead and select one of the engine groups. Okay, let's say this right side, we could start with it. And I'll go ahead and press the Z key. After we've activated the schematic, we could press the Z key to kind of hone in on that selected object. And right now I have the group selected. So we want to go ahead and select the engine group itself. And all that means is that we need to head over back to Tools, Manage Layers, and make sure that it is unfrozen. Okay, I'll go ahead and close this out. I'll select the engine group. Go ahead and activate the schematic view. Okay, just pan with the middle mouse button, and then go ahead and press the Z key. Alright, so here is the engine. Okay, and then from there we can go ahead and right click and choose Collapse Selected. And then I'll press the Z key to, again, hone in on that engine. Alright, so now it's going to be a lot easier to set up this link. Now in the schematic, linking is actually called connecting. Alright, but notice it has the same icon. Here's connect and here is unlink selected or disconnect. Alright, so we want to now go ahead and link this engine over to our point helper. So with that selected, I'll go ahead and choose connect. And now we want to go ahead and connect this to the right engine. Notice now it has been removed from our main group and now tied to the point helper, which is outside of our main group. But now we want to take this helper and link that back to the main control. Alright, so watch this. If we were to go ahead and select our group and start to move that around, our move tool, notice that helper is going to follow. If we were to go to the helper, start to move that, the engine will follow. And if we go ahead and select our main control, everything's moving the way we'd expect it to. Alright, great. So let's go ahead and set the same thing up for the left side. Again, we can now go ahead and find that engine, find its group, go ahead and right click and choose Collapse Selected, and then activating the schematic, we'll press the Z key. If you don't activate the schematic, you might be in your viewport panel, and when you press the Z key, it's going to just go ahead and zoom on into that selected object in the scene. Okay. Alright, but heading back to this, again, we want to go ahead and select the right engine group. I'll go ahead and right click and choose Collapse Selected. Press the Z key. Let's see. Just want to make sure that the right group has been selected. Okay, so it looks like yes, the group is selected here. The right group is selected. So once we have made sure of that, we'll now go ahead and use the connect tool to connect to the point helper. And now we'll want to connect the point helper back to the engine control. And now we want to test things out to make sure everything's moving just fine. We always want to get into the habit of testing our control rigs before we call them finished, because we might run into a little problem that would be rather troublesome to fix if we're not paying attention paying attention of finding those problems early on in our process. Okay, so all right, we have everything linked together. Let's go ahead now and make sure that we freeze transforms on these helpers. All right, so I'll go ahead and select both helpers, Alt right click and choose freeze transforms. And that's going to make it a lot easier for us to set up our connections. All right, great. So we've learned how to use the schematic. I'd also like to show you this. If we were to go ahead and close this out and head over back to the Graph Editors menu, notice we have save schematics. So these are basically schematics that we open up. All right, and we can go ahead and delete them by heading over to Delete Schematic View. Notice we get a list of all of our schematics. So we'd simply choose the schematic view we'd like to delete and choose OK. But each schematic view has a different type of layout. So you might find the layout that works for you, and therefore you may not want to go ahead and delete that layout. Okay, so be mindful of that. But again, we've learned the basics of working with the schematic view, and now we can go ahead and move on to the next lesson where we discuss how to modify our pivots in Max.